everyone. Welcome to Newsweek and ASP's Gen Z Roundtable. My name is Juliana Pignataro. I'm the news director at Newsweek and the least important person in this conversation today. Here with me, we have Chris Evans and Mark Kassen, who are going to be moderating this event as well. We also have three Gen Z leaders here with us today who I'm super excited to introduce: Jessica Carpenter, Manu Neal, and Ross Irwin, all of whom are joining us today from Bridge USA. Today we're going to be talking about gun violence, school shootings, and mental health. Quite frankly, there are a few issues in America today that deserve our more urgent attention. Gun sales are skyrocketing. Months of lockdowns and isolation have taken an unprecedented toll on mental health, especially among young people. And just as schools are about to reopen, we're seeing mass shootings catapult angry young people back into the news cycle. And so with that, Chris, I'd like for you to start the conversation. Admittedly, that's a pretty terrifying introduction to a conversation, but it's such an important one for us to be having. Can you tell us a little bit about what role you hope ASP will play in getting America to facilitate these conversations?
Sure, just participation. I think, most of those things you just mentioned can be maybe not fixed completely, but certainly mitigated to some degree through voting, through engagement. And, I know that so much of the political landscape is daunting because not only is terminology tough to navigate, but even the process of politics, how things do change. How do we actually move the needle beyond just, voting every 4 years on a state level, really? So it's just a matter of trying to create engagement, somehow act as a catalyst for interest in the world of politics, because the amount of people who don't participate can really tip the scales. And to try and light a fire under some of them, that would be the greatest goal that we could accomplish.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I do agree with you that it all has to start with engagement. Mark, could you explain to our audience a little bit about how the partnership with Bridge USA works, and particularly why it's so important for us to hear from Gen Z?
Sure. I'll do the second part first, just to piggyback on Chris's answer. Elected officials are elected, and they're elected by constituents, which are people. And that generation, Gen Z, I think we've experienced, not just through Bridge, but through the millions of young adults who participate through ASP, have a lot to say and are yearning to be heard. And if we don't create a platform or a place for them to feel engaged, they will go away. They are more plugged in than anything I've experienced before. They have plenty of opinions and wish to be a part of the future of this country. So we need to make sure there's an avenue for that. So along those lines, Bridge. We started listening to Bridge before we started working with them. We started reaching out to Bridge to help. I can't remember if you came to us first or if we found you. But once we met Manu and Ross and the whole group, we started hearing what they were doing on college campuses and realizing this was a great direct route to people who wanted to participate in a larger way. Once we started talking to them and hearing what they had to say, we created a formal partnership and a fellowship. So what we do is we have a fellowship of college students throughout the country who in quadrants, basically, or more than quadrants, in divisions, every day go through the things and the issues that are happening. They create briefs for us. They submit them to our newsroom that we have every single day. And we use that as a base to go and talk to elected officials and use those for basic questions to make sure that the elected officials are answering things that are germane and are important to not just Bridge, but the people that they represent throughout college campuses throughout the country.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And thanks again, Chris and Mark, for being here today. I really want to hear from Jessica, Manu, and Ross. So let's start with gun control and school safety. Over the past month, we've seen shootings are back in the news. We all know this. I don't need to explain to you all here today that Gen Z has grown up at the forefront of this. This has rapidly become the norm in American culture, and as your generation has come of age, you've been watching this firsthand. Jessica, Manu, or Ross, whoever wants to answer this question, can you describe the toll and effect that type of violence has had on an entire generation?
Well, thank you, Juliana and Newsweek, for organizing this. Chris, Mark, Kaylin, all the folks at ASP, you know how much we need you, and you know how important this partnership is to us. It means a lot to have young people actually represented at the table. And the reason why conversations like this are important is because it gives the people that are going to inherit tomorrow a seat at the table today. And that is so important, especially with conversations like this. Gun control, we've spent the last 3 years just traveling college campuses, understanding what it means to be a young person in this political moment. What you'll find is that there's a lot of disagreement on the solutions, but there's a lot of agreement on the problems that need to be solved. And that's a really unique opportunity for Gen Z to capture. When it comes to gun control, two things. One is that there's this specter of fear now. When you go to college, when you go to school classes, college classes, in the 80s and the 70s, you had nuclear war drills. Now you have active shooter drills. That shouldn't be a reality that, kindergartners, preschoolers, first, second, third graders need to be put through. It's psychologically devastating for how people are thinking about their lives. And I think the second piece of this is that when you're a young person, this epidemic of gun violence is a uniquely Gen Z problem. Just yesterday night, we had a mass shooting in Orange County. In the past, I think, week or so, we've had a mass shooting almost every other day. That's a problem. And I think that demonstrates that young people have to step up and have to elevate their voices, because this is devastating the way that students are thinking about their daily lives. And that's where we come in. And our job is to facilitate these tough conversations so that we can get somewhere.
Manu, you mentioned this political moment, and I want to talk about that a little bit. As the gun violence crisis in this country proliferates, the politics of the moment are increasingly polarized, with positions so entrenched and emotions running so high around these issues. How can America begin to have productive conversations?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. There are a lot of tough conversations, and so we've developed at Bridge some things that you should think about when jumping into any tough conversation, and it really breaks down into two things, right? First is, how are you going to approach that conversation? What's the mindset you bring into it, right? And the second is how you actually have that conversation, right? So when you're about to jump into a conversation like this, there are a few things you have to recognize, right? One is, we're definitely not right about everything, and we might be wrong about a lot. And so bringing that sense of humility is of the utmost importance. We also have to be willing to learn, not just to win the conversation. So many people just want to win, but if you approach the conversation as an opportunity to learn, then you can actually get some good things out of it, right? And finally, dialogue will not solve problems, right? But it can be a good start. And this country has lost the ability to talk to one another. And so we have to be able to have that conversation. We know that, that won't change the policy, but that's a good starting point, right? So have the courage to have that conversation. Then when you're in the discussion, right, there are a few things you got to do. And we've got some core discussion norms at Bridge that we follow that are good ways to keep the conversation civil, productive, and empathetic, right? First is just a basic rule of life. Don't interrupt people, let people speak, let people finish. The second is, you have to listen rather than listening to respond or to critique, but really hear someone out. Thirdly, you've got to critique the perspective, not the person. So ad hominems, personal attacks, those don't get you anywhere. Talk about what's being said instead of who's saying it. And finally, we're all individuals. And so you can't expect someone to speak for a group that they belong to and say, oh, why do all Republicans believe this? Why do all Democrats believe this? But treat that person as an individual. You're going to find a lot of nuance there, and you'll be able to have a productive conversation.
Juliana, can I amend my previous answer to why we need to listen to the youth and talk to Bridge to just using Ross as an example on what he just said?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think that the emphasis on nuance and conversations, we've lost that. And I think it's such an important starting point, to Chris's point, to get people engaged in these conversations. You both kind of touched on something that I really want to talk about, which is that not everyone agrees and not everyone knows what the solution is. And I think that we all understand that we have to talk about these things. There is no disagreement there. What people do disagree upon is what exactly we need to do. And I'm curious, where do the fault lines lie among Gen Z? Where are there agreements, but perhaps more importantly, where do those disagreements lie?
I think it's important that we embrace the complexity of the issue and look at both sides of the argument. There's a difference in mindset underlying this debate. And on one side, we have the argument of the Second Amendment, where you have the right to protect yourself. And this side also talks about the individual using the gun instead of the gun itself. The other side kind of focuses more on the gun and the impact that that has on the community and who it puts in danger. The argument also talks about mental well-being. And I think that one side also kind of questions, why should somebody else's mental well-being impact the way that you perceive my personal? So the debate then becomes kind of like a give and take situation between safety versus freedom. And I think that both are really strong arguments. There's also the point of mental health that we're talking about, where the fact is that 61% of gun-related incidents and deaths in 2019 was from suicide. And acknowledging this, I think, is also important when we talk about gun control. The similarities between both sides is each side wants a certain kind of protection, right? And I think they also do take mental health into consideration. And I think it's safe to say that all of us agree that we want to have fulfilling, long, good, happy lives. And looking at statistics, 57% of voters actually think that there should be stricter gun laws, which means that more than half of the population does agree on the problem. And that's a really good place to start this conversation. The next step, I think, would be finding solutions that make sense and then also seeing where improvement.
Jessica, you talked about mental health, and I want to go back to that. Mental health in the conversation that we're having today, these issues are inextricable. We can't talk about one without talking about the other. And so I want to broaden the conversation and talk a bit about that. And Mark, I'll turn it over to you here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've heard a lot from Bridge USA and from Gen Zers about mental health and how strongly they feel. And quite frankly, it's impressive because that's been stigmatized over the years. And this generation seems to be requesting a different path. And, there's cultural pressures. The pandemic has also helped to normalize the conversation. So my question is both to anyone in the group, Manu, Jessica, Ross,